Hi everyone, welcome once again to Be Breathe Ready Dialogues. I'm Agni and I have Ira Winkler with me. And to me, he's a guru. He's a visionary, and I don't want to spoil his thunder, but there are times that people have targeted him instead of targeting the company. So Ira, all over to you. Welcome to Breathe Ready Dialogues.
No, thanks for having me. Oh, did you want me to introduce myself now, or what?
That would be nice. That would be great.
Okay. So anyway, Ira Winkler. I'm currently the CISO at in a company that focuses on CTEM and CRQ. And anyway, my background, I started my career at the National Security Agency. I was an intelligence analyst and got cross-trained as a computer systems analyst, as they describe. I did a variety of things. After I left the government, I ended up investigating. I became a government contractor, and as a fluke, I ended up investigating the Citibank break-in 1994, which is dating me. But it was the first large-scale, publicly announced cyber crime, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. And, we end up catching the guy after a while and did a variety of different things. I've written 8 books. Over my time, I was chief security strategist at HP, chief security architect at Walmart. And on my side, my passion project is I run CruiseCon, which is essentially a cybersecurity conference on a cruise ship. That's kind of like a retreat that venture capitalists hold for the Fortune 100 CISOs, but I open it up to everyone because the people who need something like that the least are Fortune 100 CISOs, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I mean, I've been hearing a lot about CruiseCon, and the kind of feedback that comes from there is extremely positive. But tell me about your experience with breaches, because you've got some very, very great stories to tell.
I mean, depending on going back to data breaches, it goes, frankly, I mentioned the Citibank break-in was my first foray into, I guess you'd say, the commercial world. I ended up going ahead and essentially being, one of the lead investigators on the project, where we were going up to New York, going through logs, and we had to invent mechanisms to actually examine data breaches and things like that, how to go through data, how to figure out how to prioritize what's coming in, how to figure out, okay, how do we recreate sessions that might have happened months ago, if not weeks ago or days ago. And so that became fairly interesting to figure out, okay, here's actually, in the world of cybersecurity, it's interesting to see something tangible of such a scale. And so anyway, that became part of my original data breach experience. Then over time, I've helped. I remember getting a call, for example, from a Fortune 30 CISO who was a friend. And he was like, Ira, what does it mean when the FBI walks into your office and says, we just want to let you know that there's malformed DNS packets coming out of our network, and they won't tell us anything more about it. And I'm like, well, it basically means you're screwed. And he's like, what do you mean? I go, basically, malformed DNS packets probably means that you are being, you have been infiltrated by China, as an example, and the FBI was monitoring known nodes that China uses and saw traffic coming from your network and is now telling you this. So then I got involved in helping to do a response for that. There's been different types of responses I've done through the years. There's been technical responses for different types of data breaches, and there's been actual, I would call it more operational responses, because, my passion in many ways has always been the human aspects of cybersecurity. And then actually, it's a little over a decade ago, the Syrian Electronic Army was pretty prolific, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. And they were compromising the White House, or I think they didn't compromise I think they did compromise the White House, come to think of it. But they were compromising, I remember a big deal about compromising Oprah Winfrey, compromising Harvard, compromising the Associated Press. One of their compromises caused a big dip in the stock market, because what they did was they hacked the Associated Press Twitter feed and said there's an attack on the White House. I can't remember the exact details, and that President Obama might have been impacted, and all of a sudden that tweet caused a major drop in the stock market. So anyway, I got involved with a few of the responses, and then I gave a presentation calling them a bunch of cockroaches, which they are. And they ended up hacking RSA, or hacking the RSA conference website because of me. It was kind of funny. And they're like, who's the cockroach now? I'm like, what the hell? What do I care if you hack RSA? And then they hacked the Wall Street Journal Twitter feeds to call me a cockroach. And then, because I investigated why, how they were able to do the RSA hack. And I wrote up a summary of, it took a lot of effort, but it was really just a very trivial accomplishment in the grand scheme of things. All they did was redirect a third party who handled their DNS of a vendor that they basically, just to give you an idea on how breaches actually happen, nobody hacked RSA's conference site. What they did was they realized that the RSA conference site, when you went to the site, it initiated a software program that was initiated by a call to another system. So it was like, I can't remember the exact name, but it was like something, like www1 dot, I forgot the name of the company. They ran Lucky Orange software, but anyway, so what happened was the people in the Syrian Electronic Army saw that there was that line of code. They went ahead, figured out who was the ISP for that Lucky Orange provider, and then they went ahead and hacked this small ISP in the middle of the United States by just going ahead and sending them a phishing message, getting access to one of their salespeople's logins, and then they were able to go ahead and essentially log into the administrative system and redirect what or what some like NSF1 or whatever it was to an Imgur site. And so all that happened was, the way this massive hack theoretically looked was, you went to the RSA conference site and it just put up a graphics page, it just put up a page saying, who's the cockroach now, Ira Winkler, when all they really did was not hack RSA conference, not hack the software vendor, but basically hack a small ISP and redirect a subdomain to go to an image file. And this is the problem with a lot of data breaches. And then I've done other ones through the years that involve different sorts of intellectual property, that involved a whole bunch of, potentially sensitive data for customers and things like that. But a lot of these things are happening. In that case, it was like a RSA conference, Lucky Orange, ISP. So that was essentially a fourth party compromise to hack another website. And then the Syrian Electronic Army, after I said how trivial their hack was, then they went ahead and basically hacked the Wall Street Journal Twitter feed by guessing passwords there. And then they hacked BuzzFeed's Twitter feeds to call me a cockroach again. Then I wrote another article saying how lame they were and still cockroaches. And then what happened was, I knew they would attack. In this case, it was IDG, who was the home for Computer World that I wrote the article for. So we prepared Computer World staff as well as IDG staff of a potential hack that would happen. And what happened was, like clockwork, 4 hours after the article went live, these people were trying to go ahead and hack IDG by sending lame phishing messages. They tried to make a claim that it was their B team, but the reality was there is no B team for them, because I got inside information on them. And we were basically their A team was just sending phishing messages because they had a standard method of finding out who were executives in the company, sending out emails as executives in the company, telling people that they should read an article, which they had to log in for. And essentially everybody detected it because, in the great irony of things, somebody left the company, they retired, they never changed their LinkedIn page. So they were getting an email message from somebody who left the company 5 months before. This is how these hacks occur. In this case, let's face it, it was a fairly comical thing. There have been data breach I've investigated that have been more involved and more critical. The people who are actually professional seem to be able to be, how would I phrase it? So, just did a recent one, Ragnar Locker, where they were going ahead and trying to compromise a power utility.
The same group?
Ragnar Locker? It's a Russian hacker group.
The Syrian army, is it the same group, or are you talking about a new group?
Oh, no, it's a different group. The Ragnar Locker people are highly professional.
Actually, until now, whatever you told me, it's difficult for me to recap. So let me go one by one. I mean, you are a wealth of information for me. So the first thing that you told me was that when you do cyber forensic analysis, it used to be tough in the early days, but now I think there are tools that do it in faster way. But even then, this is my experience, that whenever there is a cyber forensic analysis, people need to access all the logs. And if the logs are easily accessible, then good for you. If they're not, then okay, that's a different experience. But more importantly, until the forensics are done, you really can't access any system that's on the same connected path where the attack has happened. This was my first thing that I learned from you. The second thing that you talked about was how hackers hack. And one of the biggest takeaway that I have from that is that you had prepared the IDG guys that there is going to be a potential hack. So the message that I got from you is that preparing for a hack is so much more important than just sitting and waiting, saying that, okay, we've put in cybersecurity, so nothing's going to happen to us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a given. I mean, especially when like the modus operandi of the attackers. And frankly, in this case, obviously, we had a very specific group. But, in many industries, for example, that there are prolific hackers who are going after companies of certain types. And if an organization is proactive, they can go ahead and proactively let their employees know that we are potentially going to be a victim of some certain types of attacks. And clearly, phishing attacks are among the most prolific ones. But at the same time, there are also technical attacks, and you can tell your technical teams, it's like, look, you really have to, for example, lock up DNS, lock up, the web, how like certain ports on your internet and things like that, because we know attackers who are coming through are going to be attempting to compromise, for example, outdated versions of this software. And we need to make sure that you have installed the latest patches on all the software, or have at least taken mitigating controls on a lot of that.
And also look at privileged access to figure out, if those are under control, because sometimes if the hackers are able to get into, in any way that they're able to get access to, you've been there, right? There are sometimes there are super user passwords super user accounts that don't have passwords. But what I'm saying is that's the area that people need to freeze up as well, because super users can be used to launch far more bigger things than just defacing a website or doing something wrong, maybe a ransomware. And I think that's one area. But to your point, as you said, in preparation, do you believe that if people were able to keep everything at arm's length from the critical assets, do you think that make better sense? I know hospitals, for example, many hospitals that we know about have a flat network. So everything is available once you walk in. If you're able to beat the initial defenses, then you have the whole thing to yourself. But on the other side, manufacturing plants, for example, they have very different OT networks, very different IT networks. So there is some level of segmentation to some extent. Versus, let's say, a financial bank, and they would probably have more controls because they are more mature in cybersecurity.
I mean, at some level it depends. Here's the reality of the circumstance. Do I look at, am I worried about the Syrian Electronic Army type attacks? The answer is no. It's almost comical how, what they're doing. I've investigated bank robberies where I'm like looking at a person and basically they hacked an electronic funds transfer system, and instead of potentially stealing millions of dollars, they had no idea what they broke into, and they turned it into a where site. And then they basically, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like they just had it for like little, teeny bopper hackers to exchange software on it. And I'm sitting there like, you got to be kidding. But I'm concerned about the sophisticated attackers, the ones who are skilled, the ones who are professional, like I mentioned, Ragnar Locker, who are going to go ahead and basically go in, systematically go through data, figure out what data is there. They have processes that they implement. They run it like a business. They run it very professionally. And then they download data and they lock up a company as well as theoretically they can, in such a way to cause harm, which was essentially, for lack of a better term, the case of, in many ways, the Colonial Pipeline incident. And even in that case, the criminals specifically were not as good as you would have thought. I mean, they didn't know how. I mean, the FBI got 85% of the money back. And the reason they got 85% of the money back was because, I forgot the name of the group now. You might know. Anyway, it was, Russian prolific ransomware. What? Oh, DarkSide?
Yeah.
So anyway, like the DarkSide is essentially a service provider. They provide ransomware as a service, and when you license their software to use in a ransomware attack, you have to pay them 15%. They're just essentially a software, ransomware as a service. And the people who did it did not know how to launder their Bitcoin, and the FBI was able to track it back. Yet these people were fairly good at essentially phishing to get into the network. They were then able to do reconnaissance, figure out how to lock up the network. But even after all that, their execution was kind of sloppy and not being able to, and it's a good thing, but they were essentially sloppy in how they were able to go through the follow-up processes of laundering the money and taking care of stuff. I'm concerned about those type of people, whether or not it's a hospital or whether it's a company with fairly good security.
Yeah.
Like, you could fault theoretically Colonial Pipeline at the time. I think the fault was not having multi-factor authentication, which allowed for the attack to essentially proceed the way it did. But if you could go ahead and proactively understand how attackers are going to be methodical, the fact of the matter is you need to go ahead and have as strong defenses as possible, whether you are a hospital or whether you're a global 10 company. And this is where people are like, because the reality is that attackers can come in and take over a hospital in like a half hour probably. If they get access to a Colonial Pipeline, it takes a lot longer. If they even attempt to get into one of the large banks, sorry, don't want to mention my former employers, but going through there, God, are you gonna have a nightmare to try to get through all the defenses? Not that nothing's, there's no such thing as perfect security. I want to say that.
Yeah.
But the more advanced organizations do have much better cyber hygiene. They have much better advanced cybersecurity. They have much better monitoring in place, things as they're happening.
Even now, one of the things that is worrying me, and I fully agree with you, that I'm no longer worried about the hackers that were there earlier. because the techniques that they were using. But right now, the worry that I have is that the attackers have become, they're no longer, let's say, a bunch of guys in a dark room trying to, look at the web. They're smart guys. They're educated. The kind of attack that they did on the help desks, right? In recent times, right? There have been 3 or 4 of them. Qantas, Marks and Spencer, and JLR, and then this MGM. Or was it MGM? Yeah, MGM. Somebody went up to the help desk and they picked up the phone and they threatened someone in impersonating someone in the organization. Now that requires knowledge, skill, understanding of how the company operates. So there is enough recon done. Also, whoever's on the phone, he needs to speak good English. The amount of the kind of language that somebody in a senior position would speak, right? It cannot be, there used to be early days when there used to be these scammers who speak in a very faulty language, and you could detect this guy is not the right guy. But now it's becoming more sophisticated. People are going after, and large companies are falling prey to it. I never expected F5 to get breached.
So well, let's take a step back and look, for example, at things like SolarWinds and F5. Those are different types of hacks. And let me tell you why those are different types of hacks. SolarWinds and F5, put them together. This is, the SVR or China, or, SolarWinds was the SVR. F5, I can't remember if it's China or Russia, it doesn't really matter. But if you have a nation state that is intent on getting into a private company, and these are very targeted supply chain attacks, because they realize that once they can get into these type of software, they can get further access, not to a targeted company for a quick hit, but for many, many companies.
Absolutely.
And this is one of the biggest things that people really don't understand, that when you start getting into these companies, there's a lot of effort putting in. And I'm even going to go back to, so a lot of people think Kevin Mitnick was not that misguided teenager. Kevin Mitnick, when he was doing his things back in the late 1980s, or whenever he committed his original crimes, he was working with an accomplice. And their goal was to put backdoors into every major computer company. Like, I work for HP, which acquired Digital Equipment Corporation, and and vendors all over the world had to stop what they were doing to reevaluate every line of code that went into their software, because his goal was to put backdoors in, to have backdoors into every type of, software operating system out there. And those are devastating types of attacks. And it causes a lot of grief and aggravation. And this is essentially what the SVR and, with SolarWinds and F5 have done. They have been able, or they are trying to go ahead to get into other organizations with trusted software and be able to go ahead and commit acts of espionage, or whatever the case, whatever their end goals are, whether it's sabotage, because there's the whole concept of information warfare, which is now cyber network operations. There's cyber network defense, there's cyber network exploitation, and there's cyber network exploitation, and what's the last one? One is essentially gathering intelligence. The other is to commit acts of war, essentially, where they're prepping the battlefield and then being able, for example, to shut down the network at the touch of a button. And these type of things are very, very dangerous and critical. Now, Russia getting in, frankly, the SolarWinds damage that they did and the acts that they did, they got into a lot of organizations because of this. But do I blame SolarWinds for falling victim to Russia? Frankly, if you're going to blame SolarWinds, blame the US Department of Defense, because they have fallen victim. Blame all energy companies, because they have fallen victim to Russia and China and everyone else. You are not going to essentially stop a nation state, given that they have unlimited time and unlimited resources, to go against you for strategic, and when I mean strategic, I mean long-term, decades out type of activities. They're going to be highly focused, put a lot of money and effort and time and some of the best minds in the world to targeting you. So do I blame SolarWinds? You can make an excuse of, oh, gee, they got in this way or that way, but it still took the SVR to get in, not a little script kiddie. Then you go ahead.
And I think,
because
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying the point that you were making.
Interrupt me.
No, I know. I mean, I hate to interrupt you because you're telling a story which is so riveting. But the point I think that you were making, and that's what I wanted to get to, is it goes back to your original point.
Yeah, I mean, it's an area where the nation states are going. It's an area where the criminals are going. See, there's a whole thing where, so am I theoretically worried about China or Russia? Not worried about China for a large extent. China is sloppy. China is egregious. China doesn't care if they get caught. A lot of what they're doing is in economic espionage, and that is a problem. But from a national security perspective, China might be prepping the battlefield, and China just accused the US of doing the same, frankly. I saw like an article come out. But at the end of the day, the same type of attacks that are being used for nation state attacks, there's also a lot of sophisticated criminals who can do similar types of things, where they have a lot of good resources, they have this, and potentially they could go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to ransom, when this has happened in different regions of the world, I am going to lock up your power grid until you pay me money. It was, for example, this was an older story, but so some Brazilian, I think it was a Brazilian company, hired a bunch of hackers, used Dr. Evil quotes for hackers, to test their network. And then the hackers thought they didn't pay them enough, and they locked up their network. And that's the type of stuff where, okay, choose your vendors wisely, but at the same time, there are other areas around the world that have had, attacks against the power grid. They've had attacks against the Marucci. There's the story back where this got Marucci incident in Australia, where there was a network technician who was fired, and he essentially went ahead and opened up all the sewage valves and things like that, because he still had a way of, accessing the equipment and opening up valves a little bit remotely. So you have a lot of critical infrastructures that are vulnerable to the nation states, but in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the nation states are not going to take action. I'm more worried about North Korea and Iran because they have less to lose. The more somebody has to lose, the more damage that could happen. But China, Russia, they're not going to do anything overly stupid, to really create an act of war in theory. Then you have the criminals. Some criminals, again, are very focused. Like I said, Ragnar Locker attempted to lock up power systems and things like that. And that's not a good thing. And these criminals are potentially getting in there with the potential act of creating harm for the purpose of profit. Now, depending on what they do, might create more of a response than others. So for example, I think it was the same ransomware group, I could be wrong, that hacked Colonial Pipeline, that also hacked hospital systems, or I should say their affiliates hacked hospital systems.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden,
blood banks as well.
Yeah. But but the hospitals were more sensitive than banks, because unfortunately people are like, okay, it's money, that's one thing, but hospitals, oh no, that's wrong. And so what happened was the affiliate group basically said, we're not going to allow anybody in the future who licenses our ransomware to attack hospital systems.
Yes, that's what they said. They actually made a statement on that.
Right, they made
and especially children.
Yeah. But then what happened was, they basically shut down and opened up under a new name. And because they had such bad publicity, and maybe they told their affiliates stay away from hospitals and children and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of control because they realize once the heat comes down on them, the problem is that lots of people fall victim, but law enforcement agencies are basically impotent when it comes to investigating a lot of crimes, because there have been times where I have given law enforcement packages on crimes with a bow on top, and they want nothing to do with it. Like one time, for example, I had a debit card that was cloned somewhere, probably when I traveled to Singapore. And all of a sudden, like, I noticed a pattern of withdrawals along an LA area because I was able to go ahead. I saw like $100, $200 withdrawals on a daily basis from a debit card that I had. Luckily, I had money that it wasn't as critical as it could have been for a lot of people. And what happened was I put together a pattern. I opened up a map. I said, okay, here's the places, and these people are going back to the same places every day within this period of time to withdraw money out of ATMs. And I was giving that to the bank. And I'm like, okay, here is the pattern. You could go to these stores, send an investigator, tell the police to wait for these people every day. And they're like, okay, we'll make a note of that. I go, you don't care, do you? I go, I can literally hand you these. They're like, okay, I'll put a note that you're willing to help. And then the guy finally says, here's the reality of the situation. We're going to get the money back. I go, okay, then give this information to the ATM vendors. He's like, the ATM vendors are insured for this type of stuff. And I'm like sitting there. These people are not showing up to that ATM every day to take my money. They're not going there for my money. They're going there probably for a dozen cards at a time that they are hiring, probably, whether, I'm staying at it, but anyone from, low paid people where they're saying, go to withdraw and we'll give you a little bit of money, and they are hiring these people. That this is a crime syndicate that is having people all over LA take out money, thousands and thousands of dollars on a daily basis, grand theft across the board, probably. And these people don't care because there's an ecosystem that is absorbing this.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that not only that, people are, some organizations are very far from what you said in the beginning, anticipate probably an attack, build capabilities to contain them, and then make it better every year so that you're ready for the next attack whenever it happens, especially if you are in a critical national infrastructure or in an organization that can be impacted negatively. We have seen attacks on blood banks. We've seen attacks on hospitals. The Ascension Hospital that happened, right? They had to turn back ambulances. It went to such a state. Some of the people who reported online, I was reading, and there was somebody who was probably who had to give an injection, and he found that he had the wrong injection to give the patient. But he realized, and he was a doctor probably, or a senior nurse, and he realized that this should not be given to this patient. All that because of somebody was attacking. So in addition to not only that is happening, what you're saying is there are some organizations who are completely complacent because they have other means to look at it. They're not looking at it as something that needs to be taken action on immediately. The sense of urgency is missing. So what you're saying is, if we have to be in the new world of digital advancement, we need to be thinking about cyber defense and cyber resilience urgently. Is that a fair?
Yeah. I think every organization should build in cyber resiliency as much as cyber defense itself. Cyber defense means you stop, but resiliency implies you keep going.
Keep going.
And when things happen, where things are built in, you account for issues that happen, because there's always going to be issues. The question is, does a simple issue take you down, or does an issue, come up? And then learning from experience, where, there's a lot of flaky things over the years I found where you have, like, in network infrastructures are kind of complicated. You have a large company, and the large company uses a variety of vendors. And then, for example, if a vendor all of a sudden, like, I'm not using this as one of my things, but I read about this for not Walmart, but other companies. But if all of a sudden, like, a company runs a special and there's an increase in traffic, a network vendor might say, oh, this looks like a denial of service attack, because all of a sudden there's a lot of activity going to this one site, and they shut something down. And that creates a major outage for retailers because a vendor thought they were practicing good cybersecurity.
Yes.
That they thought they were preventing attacks because of a spike in activity. And, these type of things happen, to organizations of all sizes, where their third parties might be doing good. Their third parties might have an outage of something, or they shut something down they think is inconsequential, which is actually critical and sets off a cascade of events. And so we need to prepare and build in resiliency and expect things to go wrong and figure out how to troubleshoot quickly. I mean, we just, for example, had the AWS incident, was it, God, time flies, early this week, I guess. Monday. And when you look at AWS is not a bad company by any stretch of the imagination. They are handling the world's web traffic. And, here was an outage.
I think I should interrupt you at this point because I'm cognizant of the time. And I know you can go on AWS. Let's have another meeting on that and record that point of view. But what I wanted to sum up, and because you touched upon cyber resilience, and it reminded me of something that I was talking to someone recently on the Breach Ready Dialogues, and we talked about being unaffected. So if you are able to design your network in a manner that when there is a cyber attack, and if it can be localized in a particular area, that means you're unaffected in the other areas, and that business, as you said, it's no longer about cyber defense anymore. It's about resilience. It's about the ability to remain unaffected even if something were to go wrong. AWS was an example. Some companies who had multi-cloud deployments were probably unaffected. But, maybe another minute on it, and I think we should close then because it's almost about the hour.
Well, I mean, a lot of companies do have multi-cloud. They have internal resilience for things like that and so on. The problem is, I think at some point you have to be realistic about your cybersecurity, because not every company has the resources to be fully redundant, multi-cloud and things like that if something happens.
Yes.
Things have happened to AWS, things have happened to Cloudflare, and so on. So it's not just this. At some point, cybersecurity comes down to risk.
But
and the question
on that thought, do you think attackers are attacking the perimeter now, making that as a point of entry? F5, Cloudflare, AWS.
So the problem is, if people are going to go ahead and attack them, that's awesome. Because those organizations, and why I say that is, those organizations have damn good security.
Yes.
And those organizations, if they are going, I mean, of course, the people with lots and lots of resources are going to go after them. The reality why I recommend services like them is that they have resources to keep secure what they do best. An organization like like a mid-sized company is not going to be able to protect their websites to the extent that AWS and Cloudflare.
Correct.
They can't come close to doing that. They don't have the resources. They don't have the infrastructure. And so if I am a CISO of an organization, or a COO or a CEO of an organization, and I'm sitting here deciding, well, gee, look at this incident in AWS, I'm going to pull everything back in, that would be the dumbest decision ever. And the reason is not that maybe it might make a little financial sense, but at the end of the day, it doesn't. I know even this is not a secret. Large organizations around the world, for example, are still using Office 365, and things like that. They're outsourcing their applications to Microsoft, to Gmail, to Google, and everything like that. They still have the resources theoretically to create their own Microsoft Exchange servers, hire their own teams, but Microsoft has the resources to do it best in a cloud environment that provides for resiliency that companies can't do themselves. Likewise, they have the resources to constantly keep it secure and up to date. Is that not to say if I was a criminal or nation state, I'd be salivating to compromise the infrastructure? The answer is hell yes. But at the same time, the amount of resources to do that means I'm going to go somewhere else. If I'm a criminal and my goal is money, theoretically, I can hope and pray that I'm going to find that one way to get into Microsoft that's going to give me be able to extort them for $1 gazillion. That at the same time, you have a much easier time extorting countless companies for 10,000 here, 100,000 there, $1 million there. And that's just where the money is easiest. And so if I'm an organization regarding resiliency, unless I am an infrastructure company itself, I'm looking to outsource my infrastructure. I am not, for example, going to be a typical company that might try to create my own power systems. Maybe I'll put solar panels on rooftops or something to get cheap, locally available electricity. But I'm not going to try to go ahead and create my own power plant, even though AWS and companies like that are doing that on some cases. And I understand it because that's part of their critical infrastructure. But they are still going to rely upon native resources to do the right things. Anyway.
I think you spoke long, and thank you so much for that.